Well, I have to begin by recognizing that UN Secretary General Guterres and UNRWA Commissioner General Lazzarini premise that UNRWA is irreplaceable is simply put wrong, and it does not represent truth. Gaza has a population of 2.1 million. UNRWA lists 1.7 million of them as refugees, people who have lived in Gaza for generations under Egyptian, Israeli, and then Hamas control. And this is an absurd statistic intended to advance a political agenda, not reflect reality. The agency, UNRWA, where it is hard to distinguish agency employees from someone that works for or supports Hamas or PIJ or Iranians, today claims 5.6 million people as refugees, and this is simply false. There were 800,000 refugees in 1948. How could that number have grown to such an extent with the population in question aged and died? UN's inflated statistic comes from the fact that it counts as a refugee anyone with a paternal ancestor who fled the territory of mandatory Palestine in 47 and 48, whereas when dealing with any other conflict, neither the UN nor any international law consider refugee status heritable. I have to go through this presentation fast because essentially I would like to say a lot, and I've put together 25 pages of of presentation. But I suggest we maybe publish it on your site.
Absolutely.
So that we have that we don't repeat what has been said before, and that we just don't run out of time. Well, we have established that UNRWA is not a refugee agency. And as my colleague mentioned, there are estimates by credible intelligence organizations, as well as by open sources, both in the United States and the European Union, that approximately 200,000 Arabs displaced in 48 are still alive, and most others are not refugees by any rational criteria. They could be internally displaced, but they're not refugees. That means that despite what UN Secretary Guterres is saying, UNRWA could be relatively quickly replaced by a system of other humanitarian organizations and UN. Again, I would need to elaborate more on issues related to problems of corruption and vetting. But I will just mention one question. Would replacing UNRWA with a different organization not lead to similar problems? If the staff remains the same, the answer is yes. And then again, I have to re-stress the importance of vetting. And I will make a couple of subtle points in a couple of minutes if I have time. And again, the problem is that whenever the UN operates in a totalitarian zone that's controlled by a totalitarian regime, for example, in Russia or in Iran, or by a terrorist group, as in the case in Gaza, where Hamas was the government, the UN gets infiltrated and subverted. And I would be very happy to testify. I would be very happy to testify what happened to the mission that I headed once upon a time.
In Russia.
In Russia. The same case would happen here, not least since UNRWA has a terrorism problem, and it has a terrorism problem because UNRWA is simply structured to have one. And why? Because the UN does not recognize Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, PF, LP, etc. as terrorist groups, even though each one is designated by the US, by the EU, by the United Kingdom as foreign terrorist organizations. UNRWA is UN-mandated agency, so UNRWA does not recognize these groups as terrorist organizations either. In other words, to United Nations, to UNRWA, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are political identifiers. And UNRWA makes it clear it doesn't discriminate based on the politics. So you have guaranteed a situation where you will have another agency that replaces UNRWA, again, taking in terrorists. And therefore, the vetting, again, is, I think, crucial in this equation. Another reason why UN is saying UNRWA is irreplaceable is because many policymakers looking for ways to distribute aid quickly, and UNRWA's existing infrastructure makes that the easy answer. But nothing stops us as owners of the United Nations and the donor states, and of course Israel as the host country, to remove UNRWA from the equation and turn over the entire infrastructure to other United Nations and humanitarian organizations. Again, let me be clear. Ideally, there shouldn't be any UN organization. There should be probably Israel or a friendly Palestinian administration that would prosper and grow, and that donor countries could fund. And that would be an ideal option, an ideal world, but we are not there yet. I would mention one organization that would be a good example as a replacement, and I'm going to quickly describe three models that we could have, we could apply in this particular situation. I would mention UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The rationale for this is, while the people living in Gaza are not refugees, they're IDPs, internally displaced persons today. This gives UNHCR rather obvious jurisdiction, probably to some extent to UN Migration Agency as well. So I think the donor parliaments and Congress could force the issue by mandating a phase-out of assistance provided to UNRWA and then making money available to UNHCR as the lead agency and other agencies with relevant mandates instead. I would again talk about vetting, but I'm going to skip that just to talk about the models. We have essentially three models. The one that I mentioned with UNHCR that's applicable in situations of refugees and internal displacement, which is substantial. Next slide. It would be, is called the refugee coordinator model. No, we have to, okay, actually these are the three models. Basically, we can see the refugee system, the cluster system, and the development system. I would opt for the refugee system that would have UNHCR as the lead. The arrangement set out in the UNHCR and OCHA's joint, OCHA is the coordination body.
Humanitarian affairs.
For the humanitarian affairs. A joint note on mixed situations, coordination in practice, that was in 2014. That's very important because of the coordination and because of jurisdiction. Those were confirmed by the Emergency Relief Coordinator and High Commissioner in 2018. The RCM, the model, maybe can we change the slide? The RCM, so we will see actually how it looks. The RCM model applies in all refugee and internal displacement situations throughout the refugee IDP response. Whenever, it doesn't matter whether the emergency is new or protracted or whether the refugees, IDPs are living in camps. This is the cluster system, another one, please. But it's very similar to this one.
It's the RCM, you have it here now.
Yeah, it's very similar to this one. And you would have actually, in this is the one, yeah. So you have here the government, and you have the representative, that would be the refugee coordinator. Then you have the multi-sector group, and then you have essentially a form of clusters, which are essentially sectors. And just to give an idea what organizations could be in these sectors, just to give an idea, emergency telecommunications is the first one. That would be WFP. Food security would be WFP and FAO. Health and nutrition would be WHO and UNICEF. Shelter and non-food items, UNHCR as a lead, possibly with IOM. Education, UNICEF as a lead, and in some cases, Save the Children together. Livelihood, UNHCR together with ILO, World Bank, FAO, and other agencies. Another system similar to this would be the cluster system mentioned before. It's practically, it's very similar, except that the humanitarian coordinator would be in charge of that particular system. You would have clusters of groups of humanitarian organizations, both UN and non-UN, and each of the main sectors of the humanitarian action. And they are designated by the Interagency Standing Committee, and they have the clear responsibilities for coordination. But let me just probably conclude with an example that would be quite interesting, where we have a mixed situation, where we have essentially several models intertwined. We have a situation in Sudan, which is the biggest crisis of epic proportions.
Happening right now.
Happening right now. And there you had a cluster system in place, and then this cluster system was surged. So it was beefed up on the...
How many people are we talking about in Sudan?
Well, let me give you just brief situation at a glance. We are talking about, as of 2 days ago, 8.1 million people displaced by conflict. And this is since April 23. 24.7 million people are in an urgent need of humanitarian assistance. About 14 million children in a need of urgent assistance. So we could call it a catastrophe of epic proportions. And what has been happening there, as we speak, back in November, there was a UN body called UNITAMS, which stands for United Nations Integrated Transitional Assistance Mission in Sudan. The host government, which is the government of Sudan, has filed a letter to the United Nations Security Council requesting the termination of this organization, and this is now in the process. It should be terminated in the next 2 days, literally, but we'll see if that happens. In the meantime, the donors, and again, that's also a prerogative of a donor, have decided which agencies to support in which areas. Sudan is a huge country. And let me just give you an idea. The US, as the main donor, responded with the following distribution of roles and responsibilities. So it doesn't have to be exactly according to the cluster or refugee system. It will also be according to the capacities of each and every agency. So let me just give you a quick run. USAID is the main donor, as well as the US State Department. For food security, they're supporting WFP. And WFP has managed to reach to almost 5 million people across Sudan between the 15th of April until mid-December.
How many millions?
4.8 million people.
So the World Food Program was able to reach 4.8 million people, and in Gaza,
in 8 months.
Gaza is about 2 million.
In 8 months.
Yeah.
But let me tell you some more interesting data regarding health. Okay, that's a little bit unconventional approach. You have USAID and the State Department. They support the IOM. That's for the health. The Office for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that's UNHCR, UNICEF, UNFPA, the Population Fund, and a whole bunch of NGO partners to deliver life-saving healthcare across Sudan, including mobile clinics. The outreach has been tremendous. When it comes to nutrition, again, a little bit unconventional approach. You have IOM, again, funded by the USAID and the state. IOM, UNICEF, WFP, WHO. In the last 8 months, UNICEF has screened 5.4 million children, ages 5 years and younger, for malnutrition, and admitted more than 300,000 children for treatment, for emergency treatment in the clinics in Sudan. Regarding protection, again, you have UNFPA, you have UNHCR, you have UNICEF, you have obviously a whole bunch of NGOs. Very important, UNICEF provided women and children with gender-based violence prevention, risk mitigation. That's very important. Also, the USAID has provided UN Mine Service to work on this. So it has been quite a comprehensive and complex emergency. Let me just conclude with the WASH. That's water, sanitation, and hygiene. Again, a little bit unconventional. USAID provides IOM, UNHCR, UNICEF, WHO, and NGOs to improve the access to safe drinking water, sanitation, all across Sudan. Only UNICEF provided safe drinking water to an estimated 6 million people all across Sudan between April 15th and December 31, 2023. So we are talking about deploying this enormous structure within 8 months, basically from the scratch. And so I would perhaps conclude. I would have some caveats, but I will not. I will put it in the paper. But let me just conclude. Even though the ISC principles on 21st February called for immediate and permanent ceasefire and for continued support to UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations operating in Gaza, a strong approach by the host government, Israel, and by the key donors and donor organizations could definitely lead to quick suspension of compromised UNRWA functions, which means practically all of them, and lead to initiating a comprehensive humanitarian response. I would recommend with UNHCR as a lead, that could then call on ISC to activate system-wide mobilization and scale up the operational capacities without UNRWA in Gaza, and not only in Gaza, but also in West Bank and wherever UNRWA was present. Thank you.